And so this whole session will be recorded. The team's very open to questions throughout, so either pop them in the chat or if it's appropriate, feel free to sort of come off mute. We're only a small group here. The other thing I will in a moment pop into the chat the attendance and feedback form. It's really important if you could fill that out every session you're coming along to today, just to make sure that we can capture so we know who's here, but also get your feedback on what you like, what you don't like, and that helps us to develop the conference and the program again for next year. So without further ado, I will pass over to the team, and I'm assuming, Katrina, you're first up.
Well, no, not really, but I can be. I do like to talk, and I was saying to everybody before that it's my nervous thing. So if I'm feeling really nervous, I just won't stop talking. But what I would like to do now is pass over to my colleague Emma to do an acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Katrina. So before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that we meet on Aboriginal land. We are on the unceded lands of the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal and Willakali people. We would also like to acknowledge the many lands that those listening and engaging with this presentation are from today. We wish to pay our respects to Indigenous elders, both past and present, and to extend this respect to Indigenous colleagues who are with us today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emma. I know Kirsty already did a fantastic job of pointing out who's presenting today. I just wanted to provide a little further information about who we are. Really at the core of what we're talking about today is that it's really cross-disciplinary, and I think that knowing a little bit about who we are demonstrates that as well. There's a strong social work presence within the team, but don't let that discourage you. What we are talking about is really applicable across all of the university and further, as you'll get to see a little bit as we talk. So there's, of course, myself. I'm a lecturer in social work and human services in the School of Social Work and Arts. My colleague, Dr. Frederick Villander, also a lecturer in social work and human services. Dr. Peter Jeffries is with us here today. She's a lecturer in Indigenous Studies from the School of Indigenous Australian Studies. We're joined by the lovely Emma Pascoe, who is a Master of Social Work student completing a research field placement within the school, and Dr. Monica Short, who's a lecturer in Social Work and Human Services. So you can see us all in our little Zoom box here. We've got our contact details at the end of the presentation as well, and please do feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. I'll go to the next slide. A couple of the aims of today's presentation is really to introduce some key concepts from the literature around a pedagogy of kindness, to share our own experiences of teaching of how kindness encourages student learning and retention, as well as to discuss how kindness helps promote quality learning outcomes for our students. Thanks, Monica. So firstly, I wanted to pass over to Peter to really create a little bit of a context around why we started to think about a pedagogy of kindness and to start to discuss and contemplate this topic. So thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Katrina. So as Katrina said, I'm a lecturer in the School of Indigenous Australian Studies, and I'll be drawing on my experiences and the content from what we do in that school. So I do not identify as Indigenous. However, I do acknowledge Indigenous ancestry and settler ancestry in my family histories, which I'm currently researching. So in SciAS, our students are training to become professionals within our community. Some of them are first in the family, some are from extreme disadvantage. Many are dwelling in regional or rural and remote areas. And pretty much most of the students, if not all of the students, are juggling multiple responsibilities such as caring roles, employment, and their study, and dealing with the stress of COVID. So these students and communities are impacted by and working with powerful external factors such as COVID-19, drought and bushfire, compromised infrastructure such as inadequate access to internet, and health services. Whether these students are from social work, education, nursing, environmental studies, vet science, or agriculture, there's more courses too that we are also teaching into. They are the next generation of professionals who will be required to respond to drought, bushfire, climate change, and global pandemics. However, current curriculum and practice related to these diverse professions are built on colonial foundations, which First Nations scholars argue underpin many of the issues these professions are aiming to address. For example, Jay Phillips, Associate Professor Jay Phillips, Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, Eileen Morton-Robinson, and Sue Green are just a few examples. These foundations maintain dehumanising traditions and cultures, and Indigenous studies, through its multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary knowledges and approaches, addresses these systemic issues. The critical and relational approach of Indigenous standpoint pedagogy, which is what we apply within the School of Indigenous Australian Studies and our subjects, disrupts these cycles of oppression, beginning with examination of the self. So this is drawing directly from the work of Associate Professor Jay Phillips. This means understanding and examining the self in relation to knowledge production and reproduction is the key first step. This can be a challenge for some students who are not comfortable with reflexive approaches to learning. However, this approach has proven beneficial to increasing cultural competency, safety, humility, and responsiveness. All students at Charles Sturt University are required to meet the graduate learning outcome of cultural competency, which means they all study at least one subject from science. The literature associated with kindness reveals that in the teaching and learning space, kindness is considered a soft skill and therefore unimportant compared to other skills required by the professions and taught through the dominant curriculum. I'm not implying that kindness equals cultural competency or that being nice alone equates to inclusivity, but they are vital. It is vital. Indigenous standpoint pedagogy is a critical and intersectional approach that addresses deeply ingrained or systemic issues, and a pedagogy of kindness can support this transformative work. When we consider the opposite of kindness, we can see how these so-called soft skills are foundational to transformative pedagogy. The opposite of kindness is characterised by some of these key words that you can see on the slide, but there are a few others that, as a group, that we've pulled together, and they include pettiness, inconsiderate, mean, and we welcome you to share any words that you think might define the meaning of the opposite of kindness or unkindness. So each of these words, when enacted, have implicitly and explicitly been used throughout history to implement the dehumanisation of those at the receiving end and justify appropriation of resources and capital. Each one of these words is evidence in curriculum, teaching, and/or learning experience. For example, contempt might be directed at a student if they cannot submit their work on time, or towards someone speaking out with a different point of view. Animosity can be implicit or explicit, and without adequate understanding of the systemic issues reinforcing oppression, animosity may be displayed. Heartlessness may be displayed where there is a lack of empathy and compassion. When considered in light of social and ecological justice, these dehumanising actions are antithetical to human rights and the Sustainable Development Goals. A radical approach is required to ensure these students, the future professionals, are equipped to respond to an unknown future. As this research group is presenting today, we argue that a pedagogy of kindness is required.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. I'll pass over to Fred now.
Yes, hi. I'm having a rather long background working with organizations, and particularly working with organizational health. And I will talk a bit about the organizational factors that impacts on our ability to act with kindness, and what one can actually do to improve one's ability to be kind in what can be an unkind world. And as a sector, Australian universities delivers in excess of $25 billion a year to the annual economy, and is dependent on its workforce to thrive, who in turn will develop innovative research and high quality education for students. At the same time, we see that work stress has increased in the sector due to increased competition domestically and abroad, through technological changes, increased administration and casualization of the academic workforce. And there is this myth that stress and pressure push employees to perform more, better, and faster, but that is ignoring the hidden costs incurred by this. And managers often look at high pressure companies as exemplars without an understanding that these organizations actually have a health expenditure that are up to 50% greater than other organizations. And it is well known that stress and overwork lead to reduced productivity, sickness presence, and sickness absence. And in the long run, it also leads to higher levels of staff turnover, up to 50% higher in other organizations, all of which, of course, drains the university's bottom line. And stress is also directly correlated to poor mental health and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. For example, a large-scale study of 3,000 employees by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that there was a strong link between leadership behavior and heart disease in employees, concluding that stress-producing managers is literally bad for the heart. And stress has traditionally been approached as an individual issue, sending employees to seek support through, for example, employee assistance programs. And the problem with that approach is that it doesn't actually resolve the root of the problem. And as a consequence, when staff has attended EAPs, they return to the environment that caused the problems in the first place. And as a result, then they have relapses and need for further assistance to cope with their work. And then this in turn creates this vicious circle with the person becoming more and more sensitive to workplace stress, taking longer periods off work at the cost both at the personal and organizational level. A different approach is to see workplace stress as caused by environmental factors. And this then requires a two-pronged approach where one, the causes of workplace stress are investigated and rectified, and two, that the culture of the workplace is examined. And the latter is of particular importance when wanting to establish sustainable long-term changes. And the crux here is that management throughout the organization needs to be on board with the organization's stress management agenda and understand that they're ultimately responsible for the organization's culture and the well-being of their staff. And if Monica can change slide. And this is also then when kindness comes into the picture. And this relatively benign concept, which is often overlooked in organizations, and partly because it's probably too simple, but also due to the fact that the idea that nice people always finish last is so ingrained in Western society. Current research, on the other hand, turned these concepts on its head, acknowledging that the benefit of kindness can be profound, both at the personal and organizational level. Working life research has found that kindness can have profound implications for organizations, no matter what sector they are in. For example, we know through research that kindness boosts productivity. It makes people more innovative. It builds trust. It is contagious. It creates leaders at all levels throughout an organization, and it creates a positive work culture. And the thing is that, going back to the idea that kindness is a benign and relatively simple concept, it's also really easy to implement. It only takes a change of mind and can be enacted by, for example, allowing others to speak ahead of you in meetings, that we have a willingness to listen to each other without prejudice, that we recognize the good work of others by having lunch delivered to someone you know is having a busy week, or asking how people are and really showing an interest in their well-being. Becoming a mentor for someone, squash rumors, or advocate for someone else's idea. And again, coming back to the simple aspect of kindness, smile. It also changes the organizational focus with the understanding that happy and healthy staff will result in innovation and kindness towards students, developing a reciprocal exchange and a more pleasant engagement with students. Over to the next presenter.
Thanks, Fred. And I've just added a question in the chat box there. That was a fantastic list you shared there, Fred, with some suggestions on how simple it can be. And like you said, it's such a simple concept, but we know that it's not, it's not seen as something that is favorable or something that's seen as an important quality in many workplaces and in many situations. Monica, you shared in the chat box sending a nice email. It can make your day. You know that sometimes when you open a nice email, you just get a smile straight to your face as well, and it can really change your whole attitude. Louise, you've shared one there saying that one of mine is now signing off warm regards. Yeah, absolutely. I think even that, how we think about the wording we use or the phraseology we use in talking to people can make such a difference. And I did want to share today some of the literature that we've been looking at as a team. And Clegg and Rowland have this really important quote in one of their works on this topic, saying that, students readily see kindness as a mark of a good teacher. We know this. We know this from qualitative feedback. We know this from, formal and informal feedback we receive from students, that kindness is really, one of the core qualities or core attributes of a good or a high quality teacher. Yet the concept of kindness is really silent in accounts of teaching excellence within student satisfaction, those official measures of student satisfaction or professional values. We see things like, in our SES, we have questions that might allude to this quality, but it's not it's not at the fore of how we measure by any means excellence or high quality teaching. So Alice, Kirsty, you've popped in the chat box too, publicly acknowledging and talking about kindness. I think that's really important and something that we don't often think about, and why we wanted to bring this conversation to the fore as well. Alice, you've got creating space for teams to connect, especially while working remotely, in a casual way and really valuing those connections. Absolutely. I know that thinking about what you've just said, Alice, one of the things our school has done is having a Friday night drinks on Zoom, and it seems like such a little thing, but it's just one of those, particularly working in an online environment, one of those things that's not, we're not having those water cooler conversations, we're not passing each other in hallways, and we're spending, hours upon hours on Zoom and online, either emails and having online conversations that are formalized, whereas we haven't often made a lot of those opportunities for informal online connections. No, I agree, Monica, these are really fantastic. And Heather, you've said it reflects strengths-based approaches to education. Fantastic to hear that, and that's something we're going to be talking about in a little while too. I'm really conscious of the time. We're at 25 too, so I'll keep reading through these. Sam, you've got a question there, which if you don't mind, we will come back to, and a couple more fantastic suggestions in the chat box, as well as a link there. So thank you so much for sharing, and please feel free to jump on the mic too if you'd like. I will flick to the next slide. We've got some great content to get through. Next, we're going to hear from Monica. So what Monica's done is that within one of the subjects she teaches, she's really rethought about the design of the assessments in this subject and how a kindness approach can be taken to not only the design, but what we need to get the students to do within this assessment. So I'll pass over to Monica.
Thanks, Katrina. And thank you to everyone who's here today. It's great to be sharing something. Something about kindness, when I started thinking about the pedagogy of kindness, I was thinking, I bet everybody else knows about this, but how come I didn't know so much about this? And I had this real aha moment of what would happen if we began applying the pedagogy of kindness in our assessment tasks. So I started thinking about it in terms of teaching case management well 418. So there's multiple case management subjects within our university, but this is the degree subject. 3 of us team teach this subject. Katrina, who's here with us today, team teaches it, and another colleague, Ro Duncombe, and myself. And I'm so fortunate to be with these wonderful people, constantly thinking how we can embrace and enhance our teaching. We've been team teaching for a number of years now. And it's really funny, when I was listening to Professor Renee Leon and Professor Claire Macken talking earlier in their presentations, I was thinking, oh, they sound like Katrina and Rowena. It was so good to hear them saying some of the things that, that we talk about at a grassroots level. So over time, the 3 of us have been focusing on different aspects of our course and how we can enhance it and make it more exciting for everybody who's studying it. And I particularly started thinking about part of the assessment task. I began really wondering about it, wondering how can we encourage an inclusive classroom, one where there's a lot of student collaboration about learning case management, and could we really push our assessment tasks to go and nurture that in a new way. So case management is a final year degree with about 50 to 80 students. And most of those students are already in the workplace. Many of them have extensive experience with case management. Some of them, however, are new to work and don't have any idea what is case management. So we have this really mixed cohort. So we wanted to move the cohort more into a pedagogical approach, one where the students were connecting with each other and having more of a say in the actual learning about what's going on. But in doing that, we didn't want to risk any of our beautiful pedagogy that we've got as well. So we started really thinking about what could we do? And I was really curious to review. And what we started doing, which you can see on the slide, is reworking part of our assessment tasks. And we started using a really explicit strength-based approach. So in this first assessment task, what happens is the students present their own emerging definition of case management that they've brought to the subject. And then we get the students to comment on each other's definition, applying a strengths-based approach, explaining that we work on a praise point praise approach, and on the discussion board, really starting to encourage each other to grow their definition. And we really set the scene about the idea of, respectfully commenting so that they're showing kindness to each other. And what happened with that is we started to realize, and I was getting so excited about this, was that we were starting to see kindness being expressed both in the single, double, and triple learning loops of the subject. So in terms of the single loop learning, they were starting to really think about, what does the textbook and the lectures say? Where do I need to correct any misconceptions about how I understand kindness? In terms of the double loop learning, what became really exciting was students were starting to engage with each other. We were starting to see conversations in a new way happen just by a slight modification of, of an assessment task that is embracing the pedagogy of kindness. And then the other thing that was really exciting was triple loop learning, where people were not just talking about understanding case management or reading what the textbook has, but wondering about the assumptions that they have underneath and how could they really think about the values and ethics and concepts that they're bringing. And so learning started to grow in this subject. And what happens is not only do you have this in the first assessment task, but we also have this in our second assessment task. Again, they come back, they revisit their personal professional definition that they've got, and they start to share the content again. They rework their definitions with the support of their students, and again, explicitly trying to bring in a kindness pedagogy where they can really start to help each other grow together and to challenge each other in a way that's really enjoyable and in a way that can help them go deeper into the subject. Now, talking about a pedagogy of kindness, I guess the cynic in me always says, well, how do I know it's going to work? I don't want to change something unless it's going to, really come through on the SES results, unless it's really going to get informal feedback. It's always a bit scary to start trying something innovative and new. Well, what we found is it works, both through the SES feedbacks that we've been getting, but also from what the markers started telling us. Kate, who's one of our markers, has agreed for this email that she sent me to let me know how she found marking the change. And as you can see, she found it very positive. And it's not just her. I've had another marker share exactly the same feedback about the using the pedagogy of kindness in the assessment task. So she's saying if we just skip because of time down to the second paragraph, students are learning from each other and engaging more deeply in the subject materials, initially through the discussions, but as they integrated that students' ideas into their definitions. Each student was required to explain why they had chosen a point to add to the definition, and these were very well considered in their answers. It was creative and innovative, and it modelled a strengths-based approach to learning from our peers and future professional colleagues, and fostered creative critical practice. I think it allowed students to enter the case study analysis with a well thought out definition of what case management was for them. And we received feedback from the students who are in the industry, and they're saying that it's really has, like I've got emails saying that it has really helped them understand case management in a new way and improve their work. And one of them is from a senior manager in case management who was studying this subject. So I'm really curious, as I turn to this next slide, if anybody has any tips on how you integrate kindness or integrate innovation into your assessment tasks and into your subjects, because I'm always looking for new ways of how to grow and do better. And like I said, I should have known some of this stuff, but it wasn't until I was explicitly engaging. So I need people to actually tell me stuff, because then, so yeah, like Alice, thank you. That's a great idea. Create a space to laugh together and love it. Like, I know that's really obvious, but sometimes I just don't see it until it's pointed out to me. So in thinking about some tips that we found were working, was particularly thinking about starting, the whole subject and everything that we do with respect, seeing the person in what we're doing, not the cohort as a total, but each individual is important. And I know that's hard. I too teach medium and large size subjects, but we can try, and whenever it becomes contagious, as Fred was saying, when we do that, creating a space to laugh together, being specific and clear about what we're trying to achieve in our subjects, explaining our expectations, us as educators having high and also realistic expectations for the people studying. They're amazing what they can achieve. It's so exciting to see people learning what they're doing and sharing their educational journey together. To recognise progress, share time, to be culturally sensitive. Peter's really pointed out so beautifully the importance of that for us. To create opportunities for people to praise student colleagues and to end respectfully. Sam's got treating people with unconditional regard, even when they're mad at you. Good point, Sam. Thank you for that. So on this note, we're going to hand over now to Emma.
Thanks, Monica. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Pascoe, and I'm a Masters of Social Work student, and I'd like to talk about my experience of kindness as a student. So thanks to COVID and all the complexities around finding placement opportunities, I was provided with the wonderful opportunity to undertake a research-based placement with Dr. Monica Short. This placement is such a unique experience with Monica as my supervisor. She has openly and supportively provided me with a range of learning opportunities, and I've been able to engage in some of her research projects, one of which is this project, Project Kindness. So being involved in this project, even in a small capacity, has provided me with the opportunity to be reflective and take notice of times I've experienced kindness within my studies and what influence it's had on my well-being as a student and ultimately the outcomes of my studies. So thinking about an act of kindness that I observed by a course coordinator would be the blanket extension that was offered to all students undertaking the subject HCS 508. I feel that the course coordinator showed such empathy and consideration for those who were struggling during COVID times and preempted the students' needs and perhaps alleviated some stress. I also found that with the HCS 508 course, a real effort was made to discuss and model self-compassion. This was really evident during the online intensive, whereby self-care breaks were scheduled into the program, along with time during the session dedicated to working with the facilitators to discuss how mood and stress affect learning and retention. Whilst empathy is definitely taught in those social work theory and practice subjects, it was really helpful to see it modelled this way. I've also noticed, or perhaps been more attuned to the effort and care taken to give positive feedback on assessments. I've received some really detailed feedback over the last semester that was written with a warm tone and plenty of praise. As a student, I found receiving this feedback incredibly motivating, and it really pushed me to try and improve on my efforts towards my study. As a distance education student, and perhaps as a student studying during COVID, it is easy to become a passive learner. I've noticed that some lecturers have been working hard to provide opportunities for collaboration and connection, usually via less formal Zoom meetings, whereby there wasn't a structured lecture, but a collaborative conversation between students and the lecturer. I found this to be really valuable as I felt engaged in the learning materials, and it was an opportunity to not only consolidate my learning, but also learn through listening to peers discuss their practice experience. As a student, this hasn't worked in the field, has helped me relate theory to practice. I also felt that in these settings, the lecturer was more accessible, and that perhaps speak to the power imbalance between students and educator relationships. I do also wonder what I can do as a student to show gratitude and kindness towards educators. I feel like this is really important. Do other students feel that they are given the opportunity to reflect on kindness and provide that feedback to educators? That's me.
Thank you so much, Emma. The interesting thing, so we all have been researching as a group for the last 6 months or so through cooperative inquiry methodology, which is a participatory method, and we've been looking at this pedagogy of kindness. So what this has meant is, as a team, having lots of conversations and discussions. We've been so lucky to have Emma on board as well to get that student perspective and student voice, which I think is really important, particularly for the topic that we're looking at. What has been most interesting for me in preparing for this presentation is that we met and we said, okay, let's look at the themes. So we did sort of a bit of thematic analysis of all of the content we have so far from our research. And we said, you know, who feels comfortable talking about what? And Frederick was really comfortable for his background in mental health and organizational practice and research and that sort of thing to talk about that. And then we had Emma said, oh, well, look, student perspective, I'll talk about my experience as a student. I said, I'll go to the literature and I'll see what I can pull together. And we all did that separately. So we sort of had the Google Slides and we just accessed it as we could. When we came back to this piece of work for this presentation, we suddenly saw all these linkages. So when Emma said, this is what I would like to speak about, I said, that's fantastic, Emma, that, you know, it really affirms what the literature is saying about this. And then when we had Monica say, look, I'm going to share this example from practice for these reasons, it linked really well in with, you know, a lot of the different things that Peter had been looking at, or Fred had been looking at. So it was an exciting process for us just pulling all this together. And what I really wanted to talk about in this last little section, or finally, is what the literature is saying. So you've heard a little bit already through all of the speakers, but what I've pulled out is a couple of key points on what we can do as educators. And we've already had some really fantastic suggestions from you guys in the chat box today. We've heard from Emma about what works. We've heard from Monica about what works in practice as somebody who's writing and delivering assessment tasks. We've heard about from Peter as well And thinking of from an Indigenous standpoint, pedagogy also, which is really important and underpins everything that we do in practice as a team. So one of the themes that has come up throughout this conversation, as well as in the chat box, I know that there was a comment from Sam there around treating people with unconditional positive regard. Now, that's something that we teach in social work. We teach our students in counselling methods to do this as practitioners in the field. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we were role modeling, as Emma had said she noticed in one of her subjects, how to do these things? If we show empathy, if we show unconditional positive regard within our teaching. Now, it probably doesn't seem like rocket science to you all, and I'm sure that many of you are already doing all of these things. But what we've really discovered is that, yes, we're doing these things, but these are sort of, actions and ways of practicing that are almost outside the scope of what the teaching role is in as a crux. So if we think about our role, we design curriculum, we design subjects, we deliver assessments, we run classes, we facilitate discussion forums and things like that. But there is, not much mention of how we do this or what this looks like, or how, we could be doing this with kindness at the core of what we do. One of the things we can be doing, as we've touched on and has been brought up in the forum, is role model. We are, we're educators. We educate on core curriculum content at the core of what we do. But I think we also play a really important role in role modeling for our students. My background is in child and family welfare practice, and I remember doing a lot of role modeling in the field. So I would be working alongside families and children, and I would, instead of saying to, the parent or the carer, you need to speak to your child in this way, you need to be giving your child praise. Instead of saying that and being really didactic and telling them what to do, I'd sit down with the child and I would role model that. I would speak with the child in a way that would be really, it's backed up by literature on how you should speak to a child and the best ways of interacting. The parents would then see that, and inherently that would become part of their practice too, because they would see how it would work. They might, maybe I de-escalate their child in a really calm and positive and strengths-based way, and they're like, oh, that worked. So as people ourselves, as human beings, we know that if we're told to do something a certain way, chances are we'll be like, oh, okay, that's great. That sounds really good. I might take that on board. But if we can see something working, then we are more likely to incorporate that into our own practice. And that's really what we're getting at with this pedagogy of kindness. If we teach in an empathetic and kind, understanding way, we are more likely to get that back from our students, and they are more likely to take that approach into practice and into the field. So that's what the role modeling is all about. And literature is telling us that's a fantastic thing we can be doing. Communicating with respect inherently is within this as well. I think all of these points are really interrelated. We know that, as a person, when somebody speaks to us disrespectfully, it's very difficult for us to then sort of say really calmly back and nicely and be positive. We're kind of a bit taken aback. So if we can communicate in a kind way and demonstrate respect, that's what we're getting back from our students. That's what our students are then taking into practice with them. It's about building relationships, which I know can be really tricky online. And for me and for us as a team, sorry, I can't monitor the chat at the moment. Also, I can see lots happening there though.
It's all right, I've got it, Katrina. You keep
fantastic.
going.
Thank you, Monica. This relationship building, it isn't easy. It's not a one size fits all approach. I have students that, I might have a cohort of 100 students online, perhaps 20 of those students don't want to talk to me all session, and that's okay. But I keep that communication up, and that's absorbed by them, whether that's, announcements or podcasts or classes, it's absorbed. I then have a handful of students that love to chat on the phone. So I let that happen. I say, here you go, here's my number. Let's chat on the phone throughout session. I've got others who want to email me every week. That's great as well. We build relationships in different ways. We need to understand and honor the diversity of our student cohort. We have an enormous amount of diversity within our cohorts. So if we say that, we're only going to send announcements and we're only going to do, a class a week and that's it, we really limit that relationship building. If we have a student who won't sit through an hour class for whatever reason, but will catch up for a 20-minute phone call weekly, we need to honor that. We need to know that there's different ways to build relationships as we would face-to-face with students. Something else that the literature talks about, in particular, Zimmet, 2020, was talking about redesigning informal learning outcomes. So as a group and as a collective here, we are all over structured learning outcomes for subjects. We know that there's core content that needs to be covered in order to meet the learning outcomes. We know that we need to strategically align our learning activities and assessments to formal learning outcomes, which are of course approved through certain measures. But we suggest that perhaps we need to start thinking about informal learning outcomes. What else do we want our students to gain from what we are doing within our class? As we saw in Monica's assessment example, I would definitely say that one of the informal learning outcomes there is, peer-to-peer learning, being able to practice in a strengths-based way. And these aren't formal learning outcomes. These are not the learning outcomes of the subject by any measure, but informal learning outcomes that we see as important for professional development, for student learning experience, for retention, but also as a building block to meeting those formal learning outcomes and those graduate learning outcomes as well. And as Lloyd so kindly pointed out in the chat as well, really well aligned with the university ethos also. Strengths-based formative feedback was touched on by lots of people. Emma spoke about receiving strengths-based feedback as a student. Monica touched on it when she talked about her compliment sandwich or praise point praise approach. We know the importance. We know from the literature on learning and teaching that it's really important to give high quality formative feedback for student learning and retention and outcomes. What we argue is that this feedback needs to be strengths-based. We need to take away that deficit focus, particularly when we're training students for professions like nursing, teaching, social work, and all of the professions. I would argue equipping students with the ability to take that deficit focus away from things removes that colonial foundation in some ways, and it really empowers people to give important feedback, but in a way that's empowering and kind. So yeah, I guess that's sort of, I wanted to finish off with that because the literature really does support lots of things that we've been considering and talking about. And next slide, please. I think we might have a couple of questions for the audience on the next slide to reflect on and to talk about. There's a lot happening in the chat box, which I will catch up on, but I really welcome anybody to jump onto the microphone. With Kirsty, I'll just confirm, do we have another 15 minutes or are we, yeah? Fantastic.
Yeah, we've got 1 hour, so we can keep going a little bit. I think we probably need to wrap up a few minutes early just so everyone can get to the next.
Absolutely, no worries. We can talk, obviously. So I'd love for anyone to jump on mic who's got any burning questions or comments or reflections. So please, I just want to make space for that now.
There's some great questions in the chat box. Can I start asking them? So Kathika, is that how I say it? Raised a really important question about how do you encourage students, how do you show kindness, but at the same time, not get taken for granted, but also at the same time, make sure that you do quality marking, etc. So I hope I've got that. I've kind of summarized Karithka's and a couple of other people's points into that. Who would like to answer that question?
I've got a little response.
Go, Peter.
In our school, we have quite an extensive process using a marking rubric and moderation. So, and we of course welcome students to talk to us about their results and their marks and things like that. So I guess having those structures and processes in place within the school really helps to be able to be kind, but also informative and say, well, this is the only way we can mark. We're following these rubrics. It's been moderated, things like that, and explaining clearly. I'm not sure what other people do in other schools, but I feel that those kinds of structural supports are really helpful in maintaining that kind of approach.
Atiko, this is just one very small thing that I learned from one of my sessional markers, who always began with, dear so-and-so, thank you for submitting your story, or thank you for, and then you can go on to say, whatever you need to say, but you've started with at least that respectful, kind beginning. And I do it now too, but she taught me, it was a sessional that showed me how to.
Yeah, that's the sandwiching approach too that Katrina mentioned, and that we use in the School of Indigenous Australian Studies as well. I think it helps.
Heather, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
No, I used the reaction like a grown-up. I coming from the School of Education, a lot of the things talking here really resonate. Two things. One, I've always said to my students that they and their families come first. Study comes a distant third. You can always pick up stuff afterwards, but if you're not there and present for your family as and when they're needed, and if you're not present for yourself and doing what you need for yourself, then what's the point? The second thing is kindness. Kindness kind of has other connotations in terms of you're not doing them a kindness if you give them marks they haven't earned, because and you're not doing a kindness to the people that they're going to be engaging with as professionals if you're not prepared to give them the feedback that they need in order to grow. So sometimes, being too, oh, that's lovely, 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 is actually not meeting the professional kindness that we have to bring to bear.
And Heather,
Absolutely.
I think that's really important, because the students are paying a lot of money to grow their knowledge and skill base. I was going to say, who in our group would like to respond to Heather's really important point?
Oh, well, I completely agree with you, Heather. I think, we would do a disservice to our students if we were to just sort of say, oh, look, everybody's getting HDs because we're so kind and lovely. It's not really, it wouldn't be a strong approach to take, because it's ultimately wouldn't be kind at all. For us, we've been thinking more about other things, like one of the things I do practically is that I'm not too punitive in terms of extensions. I know we've got really clear guidelines at the uni, and we have to practice in this way within specific procedures and policies and things as well. So that's really at the forefront of our minds. But I think, there is sometimes room for digging a little deeper and to building those relationships which really inform our approach. So rather than sort of, if a student did a really rushed email and said, I need an extension and my cat died or something, and not saying, well, no, look, that's not a good reason, it's one day out, whatever, but saying, can I give you a call? Can we have a chat and see where you're up to? How much have you done so far? And building that relationship. And yeah, I don't know, Heather, I think there's probably it's one of those things that it's not black and white. There's no easy answers, or I don't think at any stage we're going to sort of, write a method, the kindness pedagogy, and it looks exactly this way, because one of the core things about it is it honors diversity. So for me, it's very individual and situationally based for the students that we work with, and for us as individuals too, that looks different. I think what resonated with me was what you said, Heather, about, and it's like I say to my students all the time, like, study is always going to be there. You can always come back to uni, but you need to, prioritize what's most important to you. And I know for me as an academic, that comes from, a personal place as well, because I've got 3 kids under 7. And at the end of the day, if they need something and there's a work commitment, I have to consider, what's most important. So for my students, I can really empathize with that. But thank you, Heather. Really good food for thought too, Heather. I think it's some things that we can take on board and think further on.
Susan, you've got your hand up for a question. Thanks for being here.
Monica. Thanks everyone for a great presentation. I suppose I'm just putting it out there. Like, I love the idea of this pedagogy of kindness, particularly in relationship to assessment and how we give feedback and our concerns for students. And because I'm concerned, and I'm seeing this more and more, a pedagogy of meanness, actually, which seems to have come into some of our practice, where, we can give feedback till the cows come home and it looks great, But when you have a first-in-family student coming to university for the first time and they are failed out of a subject with a 49%, I find that really untenable and really hard to uphold. And I just think that, you know, a pedagogy of kindness would see that many of our students with that kind of response from our subject coordinators and our markers are very easily disenfranchised and become demoralised, won't come back to study again. Many of them are actually, I see them, English is their second or third language. So it's not that they don't have the cognitive abilities to do the work, but they really, in a pedagogy of kindness, need a lot more support and care, I think, in many situations than we are giving at the moment. So just sharing that with everybody.
Good point. Now, that's a kind of really important concept to one of the questions that's coming up in the chat box, which is, how do we show a pedagogy of kindness when dealing with extensions? Does anybody want to have a go at that? I've done some thinking about it, so I can come in, but if somebody wants to go first, and I'll come in after you. Because this is a really good question.
I will. I'm teaching focused, and I have a lot of fourth year students who are undergoing placements, heavily assessed, lots of additional work to do. I'm quite lenient, to be honest. If a student has an issue, it tends to be COVID related as usual in the last 2 years as well, but they just have to basically say it's either, you know, a placement issue, COVID, and they get the extension within reason, within what's doable, to be able to mark within, you know, before grades are entered. Otherwise, it is a special consideration.
I think fantastic, Kylie. I completely agree with you. And I think back to the point on sort of maybe being taken advantage and things like that, I think being really clear and transparent as well. So I sort of say to my students, I'm like, well, absolutely. Look, I can give you till the last teaching day of session, but, you know, due to the policy and having to get the grades, and I can't actually give you any longer, but we've got the special consideration process, and being really transparent and explaining that process and what it looks like, rather than sort of saying, no, just can't, like I'm not gonna. But I think that really helps, that transparency, that openness and honesty. And it goes back to Susan's point too around, you know, perhaps if, you know, English is your second language, or, you know, I mean, policy is tricky for anyone. So, you know, not having that information, not having that knowledge, I think it's very kind for us to be able to share reasons and to share options as well. So a lot of my times, you know, you sort of develop a bank of things that you can, resources as well. So, you know, I might have an email about, you know, explaining and saying, look, call me if you want further information on what this looks like. But it could be a fourth year student, no one's ever explained to them what a grade pending is before and things like that. So yeah, I feel that that can help as well.
Katrina, I might just jump in. We've got 5 minutes left until the next session starts. So perhaps if there's any sort of final thoughts or final question, and then we'll need to let everyone go. If you haven't already done so, please fill out the attendance and feedback form. And can I ask that that's put back in the chat if we've got the correct link there, Sarah?
So some people are saying that they want to continue the conversation either kind of indirectly, what is it, in that kind of private sending message. There are emails. We would love to continue the conversation with everybody. And can I just say, in answer to that question, somebody put into the chat about something around the structure of the subject. And I actually find that a number of times when I've changed the structure of the information that scaffolds the assessment task, particularly in the lead up to the assessment task, I find that a number of those kind of awkward conversations with students, they actually evaporate away. And so what I've been doing more recently, and I'm going to start doing that even more intentionally, is when somebody, you know, when I have this awkward kind of exchange over an assessment task or a marking comment or something like that, I'm actually trying to think, how can I prevent that in the next time the subject's being offered? What can I do slightly different? And it's amazing how much that works. So sometimes it's just been me changing a sentence in the information in the subject outline. The other thing that I've been doing is some preempting. Like, I know that everybody is super busy, and I really understand that. And so, you know, just letting you know, there's a 2-week lead up. The assessment is coming in soon. And then sometimes I've been giving tips. For those of us who are juggling many roles, remember every 15 minutes towards your assessment task counts. 15 minutes is an hour. And when we've got an hour, we've started and we're well into it. So, you know, this sort of kind of gentle tips to get people thinking about getting their assignments in on time. And it seems to work. I'll be curious to know what everybody else is doing and how you're managing those things, because I don't want to have an awkward conversation with anyone about their assessment task or their feedback. I want to have fun with the subject.
Thank you, Monica, Katrina, Frederick, Peter, and Emma. It's been great having you all here, and just lovely to see all of this conversation. I don't know about any of you, but I'm feeling really energized and uplifted from just talking about kindness for the last hour. So thank you for nominating this topic and facilitating this session. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else has too.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for making the time and space for this conversation. We've really appreciated all of the contributions and ideas. It's great. It's really nice to know there's others who feel like us as well.
Yeah, it is lovely, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
later.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done.
Bye.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you.